This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. Stick around to the end of the video for a special offer they're making available through my channel. Gamers, hello and welcome to a very special edition of This Week in Video Games. The one where we take a look back at all the shit that went down this past 12 months and wonder aloud, where'd all the NFTs go? Let me begin by saying, thanks for tuning in this year. This Week in Video Games has continued to grow, both in viewership and in length, but honest truth, I just love putting it together. Sometimes it's tough to squeeze it in alongside the reviews, but I always really value the chance to take a look back at the week that was and chronicle the major happenings in this hobby of ours. I do imagine that like 50 years from now, if this website still exists, which it probably will, people will be able to look back at This Week in Video Games as a sort of time capsule, the same way we thumb through old editions of GamePro and EGM. Video games are not just toys, they are a cultural force, arguably the most influential of the 21st century, and I always feel really privileged to be in a position where I can cover this stuff totally independently, thanks to the support you guys provide by just tuning in. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you guys are alright. Okay, enough with the sentimentalities. We've got some gaming news to roast. Grab some popcorn, open a bottle of vodka, pop a few Xanax, because we're about to take a look back at the year that was, and what a year it was.
Why? Monkey.
Remember how 2021 ended with all those companies announcing their big NFT plans and we had hoped that it would be a fad and they'd quickly get over it? Well, that was basically correct, but not so in January 2022, when on New Year's fucking day, the CEO of Square Enix went full Shinra and announced his intention to go balls deep on the NFT scam. This was the famous address when he quizzically remarked that some people play games to have fun. Oh, how antiquated. It seems a long time ago now since the NFT bubble has well and truly burst, but 2022 was, at least in its opening months, threatening to be the year of the NFT as companies like Square, Konami, and Sega all threw their lot in. Hell, even Troy Baker announced his NFT project, asking, "Do you want to hate or create?" We'll take hate thanks, mate, as well as an apology a few weeks later on Twitter. We'll take that too. There was so much NFT bullshit going on that I had to add a new semi-permanent section to this show titled No Fucking Thanks, where I would cover the latest NFT announcements, and the following week I'd cover the walking back of those NFT announcements and the apology JPEGs. It was a good racket, easy content. Thanks NFT bros, you were good for precisely one thing: generating easy dunks. God bless you. As thrilling as NFTs were to talk about and roast, it really had nothing on what would become the largest news story of 2022, Microsoft's attempts to purchase Activision Blizzard King for nearly $70 billion. On January 18th, my second week back from holidays, right about the time I was expecting a slow news cycle easing into a busy February review lineup, Microsoft drops this bomb, and it was immediately apparent just how industry-shaking this news would be. The combined might of Call of Duty, Warcraft, Diablo, Overwatch, and the entire portfolio of King games represents an overwhelming chunk of the total gaming landscape, and for Microsoft to just scoop it up all in one fell swoop, that was going to cause some big ripples indeed. Usually, these deals go through without too much incident, think Microsoft and Bethesda, or Sony and Insomniac. But this wasn't like that. This was one of the largest acquisitions in corporate history, and as such, the regulators would take a very keen interest in all of it, a process that still continues to this day, while Sony throws spanner after spanner into the works. A strategy that has worked spectacularly well to this point, and it's still very far from certain if this deal will actually go through. Commenting on this one was always tough. On the one hand, industry consolidation and centralization sucks. You don't want one company going full Sauron. On the other hand, Bobby Kotick sucks. He basically is Sauron. So if this deal gets workers out from under his lidless eye, then that's probably a good thing, right? Especially considering that Microsoft have become known for focusing on workplace culture and treating their staff right. The concerns about industry consolidation became even more acute just a week later, when on January 31st, 2022, Sony announced that it had entered into an agreement to buy Bungie for the princely sum of $3.6 billion. The deal was as weird as it was unexpected. The studio that had gone from independent to Microsoft-owned to Activision enslaved to again untethered was now going to be on Team Blue, but it was going to be doing so on Bungie's terms. Destiny would remain multi-platform, and future Bungie games were also promised to be multi-platform, a stipulation that surely came at Bungie's insistence, since Sony have absolutely no problem making their studio's output exclusive. More on that later. The price tag was deemed hefty by all those that don't understand just how good Bungie are at what they do. This is a studio that for over 2 decades has made some of the best shooters in the history of shooters, and who have nailed live service delivery in a way that only a handful of studios have been able to do. This is incredibly valuable to Sony, who A, don't have any shooters in their portfolio, and B, have said they want to go all in on live service in the future. They really couldn't have scooped up a better studio given these goals, and while it'll surely be a little while until this deal pays big dividends, I don't doubt for a moment that Sony will make back their money and then some. Outside of that, January's biggest games were the excellent Nobody Saves the World, the janky but apparently lovable Pokemon Arceus, and Rainbow Six Extraction. Remember that one? No one does.
Emboldened by the flame of ambition.
It's February and damn man, Tom Brady has retired. What a loss for the sport. Oh well, gotta retire sometime, right? Game won't be the same without you, man. All the best. Oh, and hey, they released the Uncharted movie starring Tom Holland and Marky Mark. I'm sure we can all agree that of all the video game adaptations released this year, this was definitely one of them. February was not a great month when it came to industry news. For example, Sega closed the last of its arcades in Japan, the end of an era, and a reminder of the inexorable and at times destructive march of technology that is the backbone of our hobby. Arcades, boxed PC games, instruction manuals. The physical release is becoming increasingly rare and is only going to get more rare as subscription services take hold. Hyperscape died in February. Remember that one? Nope, you don't. Ubisoft is 2 for 2 in 2022. More hits to come soon. You know what else was dying at this point? Definitely not Stadia. That's according to Stadia, who want to insist that Stadia is very much alive and well in 2022, thank you for asking. The reports that the service is being downscaled and deprioritized are hogwash, they say, and I for one believe them. Stadia's had a rough start, but with Phil Harrison at the helm, I really can't see how Stadia could fail, and I predict big things for it in 2022. Rockstar confirmed that GTA 6 was in active development. Man, I really hope we get to see some gameplay soon. That'd be pretty cool, right? The NFT hits kept on a clangin'. Ubisoft's Quartz program was such a flop that it had to give away NFTs to its staff, who responded with, "Fuck off, we don't want this shit." And Team 17 became the first indie publisher to announce their NFT intentions, resulting in so much backlash that Team 17 had to do the inevitable walk of shame apology tour that was quickly becoming the hallmark of 2022. Sadly, February 2022 will be remembered more for its real-life events than its video game events, as this was the month that Russia commenced its brutal invasion of Ukraine, an invasion that still continues to this day while the Ukrainian people valiantly endure. Viewed through the lens of video games, it was confronting to see members of the Stalker development team leave their jobs making a game about war to go and fight in an actual war. Numerous developers and publishers pledged support, with Epic Games leading the charge, donating $144 million to Ukraine, making them the single largest non-state entity to donate to the Ukrainian Defense Fund. I wish I had a happier end to this block, but sadly I don't. This conflict continues with no end in sight, and I wish the Ukrainian people safety, security, and victory. So the news cycle was not at all uplifting during that period, but luckily the actual video games released were. Dying Light 2 Stay Human was a little rough around the edges, but it delivered. Sifu absolutely smashed it out of the park, and you just know that that franchise has a big future. Lost Ark arrived in the West and would go on to become one of the most played games on Steam throughout all of 2022. Horizon Forbidden West dropped, and it was awesome to see it finally get its moment in the spotlight. Since the first game was kind of overshadowed by Breath of the Wild, they released a week apart. Thankfully, that didn't happen here, and with some room to breathe, the thing we all really came to appreciate about Horizon Forbidden West was
Game of the Year winner is Elden Ring!
Okay, that was mean to Horizon, but I promise I'll make it up to it in my Game of the Year video. Other notable releases this month included the Steam Deck, more on that in my Game of the Year video as well, Destiny 2 Witch Queen, fantastic expansion, Gran Turismo 7, bit of a mess, and Platinum Games released their first live service in the form of Babylon's Fall. It usually takes a few years for a live service game to truly hit its stride, so I'm looking forward to checking back on this one in the future.
Introducing Mouthful Mode.
Oh my god, it's March. Tom Brady's back. We missed you, buddy. Robert Pattinson is the Bat, and Will Smith serves up the slap heard around the world. True story, when I showed this back in March, YouTube demonetized the video due to violence. My guys, do you even look at half the shit that gets uploaded onto this website? March was an uncharacteristically slow month. I guess everyone was locked inside most of the time, wiping to Millennia and hoping that Let Me Solo Her would show up to save them. It wasn't all quiet though. CD Projekt Red announced the existence of The Witcher 4, an announcement that would later turn out to be the first of many new projects, as CD Projekt Red attempted to put the disastrous launch of Cyberpunk behind them and chart a bold course for the future. It was a big year for CD Projekt Red, in fact, but their big moment would come later, and it wouldn't even be thanks to one of their video games, funnily enough. More on that later. Acquisition fever continued to grip the industry. In March, Sony announced that it had acquired Haven Studios. Never heard of Haven before? I don't blame you, because they've never actually released a video game. The studio was established by Ubisoft veteran Jade Raymond, who also did a brief stint at Stadia before they screwed her over. So sterling was her reputation, and so thirsty was Sony for studios, that they literally snapped up a studio that has not even successfully shipped anything. They're currently working on a PS5 live service game, no other details yet. Speaking of Sony, word started to leak about Project Spartacus, Sony's answer to Game Pass. Game Pass was quickly becoming the central pillar of Xbox's strategy, so it's no surprise that Sony should want to counter it by some means, though they clearly wanted to do it their way. Still focused on the sale of hardware in a way that Microsoft isn't, Sony's revised PlayStation Plus model wouldn't include first-party releases on release day, focusing on third-party offerings and back catalog. Frankly, I think it's a model that makes a lot of sense, as I like the idea of protecting the upfront revenue that game makers get from just selling their games, as wholesale reliance on subscription models hasn't done wonders for the TV, movie, or music businesses. While February was easily the biggest month in terms of releases, March was no slouch either. The excellent Tunic release and would go on to receive many Game of the Year nods. Same goes for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Stranger in Paradise served up the best writing of 2022.
Chaos.
And Ghostwire Tokyo fell a little flat given the pedigree of the studio involved. But hey, Tiny Tina's Wonderland hit, and that was actually pretty rad, though sadly, Weird West was not.
Maybe we shall being friends.
It's Morbin time! A movie so bad it was released twice because Sony thought they could clean up off the back of the meme campaign, but all that did was give people another chance to not go and see it in cinemas. Morbius sweep continued right up until Jared Leto himself joined in on the joke, at which point he totally ruined it and we all moved on. One interesting tidbit in April was that Sony and the company behind Lego had invested some $2 billion in Epic Games to support the growth of the metaverse. We'd been hearing a lot more about the metaverse in 2022, especially after the Zuck pivoted his company toward it, resulting in about $700 billion in market value lost. His vision of the metaverse is ridiculous and embarrassing, and it's never going to happen. But Epic are already kind of doing the metaverse thing with Fortnite, or at least you can see the progenitor components that will one day serve as the foundation for a more complete experience. We dunk on Facebook's metaverse all the time, as well we should, and those scammy NFT metaverse things that are just there to fleece money from idiots. But there is a version of the metaverse on the way, and with companies like Epic, Sony, Lego, and Roblox involved, you get a sense that the question of success is a lot more when than if. Bad news for Zelda fans, the delay we all saw coming finally came. Breath of the Wild 2, still unnamed at that point, was meant to be releasing this year, but Nintendo announced in April that it wouldn't happen and it would be targeting a 2023 release instead. This was far from the only big ticket release to be pushed out of 2022, and it was a reminder that the pandemic was, or even is, still ongoing. The indie game scene proved to be quite resilient owing to their focus on remote working and smaller scale projects, but big AAA studios really struggled as they juggled the transition to working from home and adapting on the fly when parts of their production schedule meant delays. Still, some games got made, and some of them even shipped in April 2022. Games like Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, which is just crazy how much they managed to cram into that package. Dune Spice Wars released into early access and was a much needed shot in the arm for the oft overlooked RTS genre. Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe Edition was a nice upgrade and more than worth the price of admission. Dwarf Romantic didn't capture many headlines, but it was actually one of the highest rated games on all of Steam for 2022, and Rogue Legacy 2 proved to be a worthy successor to one of the most influential 2D roguelike platformers ever. 4 out of 5 of the titles I just listed there were indie titles. So yeah, indies had a great year, plenty more indie bangers to come. Oh, and Babylon's Fall doesn't seem to be doing so great. It dropped down to 8 concurrent players on Steam. That's not good. Still, live service games always have their player population dips. I'm sure it'll pick up, right?
The future is going to be beyond anything we can imagine.
May, damn, we are getting through it, aren't we? This month, we're all back on that highway to the danger zone with Top Gun Maverick, and I think we can all agree, Jennifer Connelly What about them video games though? Well, remember how I was talking about Facebook's metaverse was a complete waste of time and it would never happen? Well, that wasn't quite right. What I should have said was that it was a very expensive waste of time that would never happen. In May, it was revealed that Facebook was spending roughly $3 billion a quarter trying to stand up its metaverse business with basically nothing in the way of cash flow to show for it. $3 billion to produce shit that looks like this. Later in the year, the Zuck would go on to take personal responsibility for the failure of the metaverse push, and the way he took that responsibility was by firing 10,000 of his workers. It was literally the Lord Farquaad meme, except Farquaad is way more likable than Zuckerberg. Remember how I was also talking about big video games getting delayed? Well, feast your eyes on this JPEG. Bethesda formally announcing that Todd Howard's next opus would be delayed from 2022 into 2023. Todd vacating the 11/11/22 release date you know he was very excited about. At this point, we still hadn't even seen any Starfield gameplay, but word on the street was the title was facing some challenges and would struggle to hit that 2022 release. This confirmed it, setting up a difficult narrative for Xbox to combat in 2022, that of them having no games. It wasn't technically true, since there was still stuff like Grounded and Pentiment from Obsidian, but these were niche titles when a lot of column inches are reserved for AAA releases. Sony put out Horizon and God of War this year, and snatched exclusive rights to both Sifu and Stray, two of the biggest titles of the year. Xbox was not able to clap back, despite some smart Game Pass gets like Vampire Survivors and Immortality. I think people understand why Xbox's year was so absent big hitters, and they're happy to wait for them. But yeah, 2022 definitely was not Xbox's year. Netflix though, they joined the fray. After suffering their first ever subscriber loss earlier in the year, they announced that they would be making a big push into the video game space. We always called Game Pass Netflix for video games, so I guess Netflix took that personally. Their push was initially focused on mobile titles, a handful of which are already playable through their mobile app, but they also have opened multiple game studios led by AAA veterans and are working on at least one big budget AAA PC title. More than a few big corporations have learned the hard way that buying your way into the video games industry isn't easy. Hell, look at Amazon. So Netflix's success is anything but a sure thing, though for now they are staying the course. While Netflix were trying to set up studios, Square Enix was trying to flog them off, and in May they jettisoned most of their Western operations for the tiny sum of $300 million. That may sound like a lot to you and me, but in video game industry terms, that was a bargain for the purchaser, Embracer Group, who scored Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and a buttload of valuable IP, including Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and game most deserving of a remake or reboot, Legacy of Kain. Any one of those IPs could easily make back that $300 million purchase price if handled correctly, so Square's fire sale of these seems particularly short-sighted, especially when the company would go on to explain that they plan to use the proceeds of this sale to double down on their blockchain and NFT game development plans. How's that working out for you, Square, huh? What else? Death Stranding 2 is confirmed. Thanks, Norman Reedus, for just blurting that one out in an interview on Late Night. Lucky Kojima is a pretty cool dude, and he was more than happy to let Norman off with a light beating. Oh, and there's this silly rumor that Sony are gonna remake The Last of Us Part 1, the game that was originally released less than 10 years ago and has already had a remaster on the PS4. Why would they remake that? That's ridiculous. Check your sources, Jason Schreier. This sounds like fake news to me, buddy.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
June was an important month because it marked the return of in-person gaming events. E3 had been earlier cancelled, promising to return in 2023 but vacating the field in 2022, leaving Jeff Keighley to pick up the slack, hosting his own event in LA where developers, media, content creators and other industry-adjacent people could all get together for the first time in over 2 years. I know that we all like to clown on E3, but the last 2 years has shown us what things would be like without it, and it sucked. Sanitized, pre-recorded webinar sessions, all of it stage managed so thoroughly that it felt almost AI generated. Where was the human connection, the nervous developer unveiling their life's work, the cringe moments where shoutcasters have to pretend to care about a mobile game, the F-bombs from Joseph Fares? All of that was a hell of a lot more entertaining than these directs and these states of plays and these whatever else. I'm glad that this industry still gets together and does stuff in person because gaming is ultimately about people. People making games and people playing games. And being over there in LA really reminded me of that. The show that Jeff put on was pretty good. We got to see some Sonic footage and it looked so rough that people called for the game to be delayed. Spoiler alert, it wasn't, and Sonic Team shipped that pop in with their whole chest. For some reason, The Rock made an appearance to promote an energy drink and also his upcoming film Black Adam. Looking pretty good, that one. Hopefully the start of a big new franchise for DC. Sony confirmed the existence of a long-rumored Last of Us multiplayer game, which everyone is guessing is basically just factions but bigger and possibly free to play. Xbox had their own showcase and they showed off gameplay for Redfall, due out next year. Silksong, can't believe Phil snatched that one up. And they announced a new project in conjunction with Hideo Kojima. Sony ponies were none too happy about that one. The big draw card though was our first look at Starfield, and we were all stunned to learn that it looks like a Bethesda game. 30 FPS and all, baby. The reception of this trailer was mid, to put it kindly. I don't know, a lot of people were hating on it. I think a few people were huffing copium, calling it the greatest thing since the KFC Double Down. Personally, I just think it looks fine. I was never expecting Starfield to be much more than Skyrim or Fallout in space, and this looks like Skyrim or Fallout in space. It did look a little rough though, which explains the earlier delay announcement. I mean, 30 FPS on a next-gen game that doesn't even look that great? Yeah, I think we've got to bump those numbers up. There were a few games to release this month, Neon White and The Quarry to name a few, but the one that dominated the headlines was Diablo Immortal, a game that was revealed in an unforgettable moment of cheekiness and launched in an absolutely diabolical state. Pun intended. Diablo Immortal was the single most monetized game that core gamers have ever actually had to care about, since we can usually sidestep all of this mobile stuff. But this was Diablo, this was gaming royalty, this was ours, and Blizzard fucked it on a scale that none of us could have ever anticipated. Central to the failure of Diablo Immortal was how deeply predatory it was. I recall vividly how in the years past, Warcraft's lead game designers would talk about the need to design game systems to save players from themselves, understanding that players are not able to set healthy limits with regards to play times and play patterns. What struck me most about Diablo Immortal was how much of an inversion it was of that philosophy, targeting with expert precision all of the foibles and weaknesses within us that might be exploited to extract a few dollars in a moment of weakness. The Blizzard I grew up with would never have made this game, and many other companies who are doing mobile stuff right now aren't doing this. This is not a failure of the mobile market and its dynamics. It is a failure of Blizzard's leadership, and it's one that I keep firmly front of mind when I think about Diablo 4 and other future Blizzard releases. It's July and we're all dipping our toes back into the MCU with Thor Love and Thunder. Shout out to Natalie Portman's biceps. And we all started hearing about monkeypox. No, thank you. We're not down for that. We've already been through that. No, okay? No. Thankfully that didn't become a big thing, but who knows? Touch wood. Anyway, in an absolutely absurd intersection of real-life tragedy and video game ridiculousness, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated this month, and you know who got blamed for it? Hideo Kojima, a man who spent the better part of his career warning about the dangers of misinformation, was now the victim of some 8chan gag that had actual news outlets posting his picture in place of the actual accused. Unbelievable. In lighter news, rumors began to swirl that FromSoft were getting back on that Armored Core train, but it'd be a while until that news was confirmed. Ubisoft unveiled new Skull and Bones gameplay, and everyone was like, yo, are you guys for real? We already played that like 10 years ago in Assassin's Creed 4, and it was better, because you could get out of your ship. That wasn't the only rough news out of Ubisoft though. Beyond Good and Evil 2 was still, apparently, only in pre-production, and would later go on to become the most delayed video game of all time. The Avatar video game that they were working on was delayed with no new date provided. Roller Champions launched this year. Remember that one? Nope, you don't. And that is the third time I've asked and answered that question about a Ubisoft title in this very video. Capping everything off, Ubisoft canned Ghost Recon Frontline, a hideously uninspired battle royale set in the Ghost Recon universe. Cancelling this when the game was essentially done and ready to ship was a big call, but given that no one wanted it, I guess Ubisoft just wanted to save themselves the marketing cost and or embarrassment. As bad time as Ubi was having, it was nothing compared to the plight of the monkey people. July was the month when the bottom well and truly fell out of the NFT market, with prices and volumes plummeting so far and so fast that not even the bots could produce the copium necessary to keep the whole scam afloat. Miraculously, almost instantaneously, video game publishers seemed to lose any and all interest in this whole thing. Never mind that we've been telling them from the jump we didn't want it. Now that there wasn't any margin in it, that was the point at which companies decided to step off. It's not remotely surprising, of course, but at least we can take solace in the knowledge that much like the great loot box war of 2018, this campaign ended with the good guys winning. And Jimmy Fallon is now being sued for that awful segment he did with Paris Hilton where he shouted out his monkey JPEG. So all's right with the world. As for good old-fashioned video games, July served up some winners. Multiversus took the world by storm when it launched free-to-play, though you don't hear too much about it these days. As Dusk Falls was one of the few Microsoft exclusives for the year, and it did well enough. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 hit, and goddamn did people love that. Except Donkey, of course, but everyone else loved it, myself included, because I'm playing through it right now. Biggest game of the month though was Stray, a game so beloved that it would go on to become the highest rated game on all of Steam for 2022, until Vampire Survivors came along, that is. August will likely be remembered for the escalating war of words between Sony and Microsoft as the fate of the Activision Blizzard King deal hung in the balance. Regulators in both the EU and the UK announced they were opening up more detailed investigations into the transaction, a decision that came after extensive lobbying from Jim Ryan himself, dubbed Flyin' Jim Ryan for his globetrotting to appear before various panels. I don't think anyone can begrudge the man trying to keep the likes of Call of Duty, Diablo, and Overwatch on PlayStation hardware, but it was the public messaging that Sony were putting out that was a little hard to take. Sony argued, without a hint of irony, that Call of Duty being exclusive would likely influence people's console purchase decision, when for the last few years they had secured exclusive rights to Call of Duty content like maps and game modes. That's setting aside the fact that Sony has essentially built its entire empire on targeted exclusives, locking down the best output from Japan for the better part of 3 decades, forcing Microsoft to, in effect, exit the Japanese market up until recently, and rendering Xbox completely incapable of wooing Japanese developers to port games to Xbox, again, up until recently. It wasn't just Sony talking out of both sides of their mouth though. Xbox found themselves in the hilarious position of trash talking their own games, studios, and brand in an effort to seem like the underdog, commenting frequently that Sony produces better quality exclusives than Xbox does, and arguing that Activision Blizzard doesn't really produce any must-purchase games. If that's true, then why the fuck are you buying them for $70 billion? All of this posturing can be ignored, of course. It's just corporate skullduggery to get the desired outcome, legalese and tricksy wordplay to appease regulators and get the deal over the line. Will it happen? Hell if I know, but it certainly is fun to watch. Making all of this that little bit more hilarious, Sony announced that for the first time in the history of video game consoles, they were raising the price. Depending on region, Sony added around $50 to the price of a PS5, but they didn't do that in the States, just in the other regions where they seem to be in a more competitive race with Xbox. This move was hitherto never before seen because, much like gravity, console prices go down. They attributed the increase to the challenge posed by inflation and supply chain woes, and Xbox have already signaled that they plan to follow suit sometime in the future. 2 years into the launch of the next-gen consoles, and not only are they still impossible to find, they're also more expensive when you do. Hopefully all of this levels out in 2023, but don't look to any price decreases anytime soon. August is when release season typically starts to heat up, but it already felt like a raging inferno here in 2022. Cult of the Lamb was one of the big indie breakouts of the year, as was Sam Barlow's Immortality, which would go on to get a Game of the Year nomination at the Game Awards. Rollerdrome, goddamn man, you better believe you'll be hearing more about that in my Game of the Year video. And to cap off this absolutely stellar month, we got Saints Row. I feel bad that it underperformed, but at the same time, I'm glad to know that I will never have to listen to another line of dialogue from these characters ever again. Oh, and hey, here's something funny. Embracer Group now owns The Lord of the Rings. I guess my earlier gag about industry consolidation and companies going full Sauron hit a little too close to home. In a very odd move, Embracer snatched up the IP rights for an undisclosed sum, giving them the ability to make TV shows, movies, and games based on Tolkien's seminal work. Aragorn origin story, here we come, whether we like it or not. But hey, that Rings of Power TV show comes out next month. That looks pretty cool, so maybe we should be excited about more future Lord of the Rings adaptations, right?
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot?
Oh god, Rings of Power sucks so bad. How did they spend $1 billion on this? It's so awful. Thankfully, House of the Dragon is delivering where it counts, but it really should just be renamed The Matt Smith Show, since that dude is hard carrying. Man, from Morbius to this in less than 12 months, that's a hell of an arc. The best thing on TV this month, though, was Cyberpunk Edge Runners. Holy shit. Collaboration between CD Projekt Red and Studio Trigger that was so good that it almost single-handedly dug Cyberpunk out of the ditch it had been in since launch. Seemingly overnight, the entire narrative around this game changed, where before enjoying Cyberpunk was some sort of shameful heresy, now you could declare your love of Cyberpunk proudly. The player count arched like a stroked cat, peaking at around 136,000 current players on Steam, and CD Projekt Red proudly declared that millions of people were either returning to Night City or visiting for the first time. Cyberpunk stocks were up at around the same time that Halo's were at an all-time low. Having recently announced the cancellation of split-screen co-op and the delay of further content updates, the axe finally fell on studio boss Bonnie Ross and her senior leadership team. To their credit, they did their best and they always engaged the community in good faith and with respect, but Halo has been in the doldrums for the better better part of a decade now, and Halo Infinite has not helped in the slightest. A shake-up there was clearly needed, and it's good that Microsoft have finally acted. Sadly, this month saw the passing of Queen Elizabeth, but it was a little odd when Nintendo said that their September Direct wouldn't be simulcast in the UK out of respect to the Queen. What was that about? Right, you called your game Tears of the Kingdom, and you revealed that name the same week as the Queen died. Okay, I can see how that's a little awkward for everyone involved. Biggest news story of the month, though, was the oopsie-daisy leaking of Grand Theft Auto 6. The news broke rather suddenly when a big chunk of gameplay spilled out over every corner of the internet, with Rockstar so desperate to lock it down that they were even DMCA striking YouTubers for just talking about it, not even showing any footage. The gameplay didn't even show off that much, just some open world stuff, some dialogue. I mean, it looked as you'd expect it to, but it was nonetheless exciting to get a cheeky glimpse behind the curtain, what is sure to be the best-selling game of whatever year it releases. And then every year after that for the next 10 years or so. The Callisto Protocol boss Glenn Schofield got in a spot of hot water for proudly declaring that his team was crunching. He walked that one back fast. Man, let's hope that none of those workers were being pushed that hard because the game was riddled with bugs and not ready for its release date. That would be terrible. Oh, and Babylon's Fall died that month, an outcome that absolutely no one could have seen coming. Speaking of which... October was the month that Stadia officially went to that big server farm in the sky. The first significant L in his illustrious career of W's, Phil Harrison relayed the news personally, saying that while Stadia yada yada yada, it didn't blah 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 blah, and therefore effective 2023 it would be boomed. This was the most obvious and inevitable outcome in the history of obvious and inevitable outcomes. A platform that had genuinely great technology backed by the literally limitless resources of Google, completely hamstrung by the most brain-dead business model that any overpriced, out-of-touch MBA could dream up. With just a few tiny tweaks, this could have been great. If they just listened to any of the advice they were getting, it might have been different. Alas, Stadia now serves only as a cautionary tale and a strengthening of the barrier to entry, for if Google themselves cannot break through it, what chance does anyone else have? We got our first proper look at the Mario movie this month. Turns out it looks pretty cool, and Chris Pratt was right when he told us that his rendition of Mario would be unlike anything we'd ever heard before. Because it's literally just Chris Pratt's voice. And yeah, we've never heard Mario sound like Chris Pratt, so you got us there, Chris? The Edgerunners-led resurgence in Cyberpunk turned out to be a well-timed boon for CD Projekt Red, who announced a slew of new projects, including a Cyberpunk sequel, which is going to be developed by a new branch of CD Projekt Red established in Boston. They also announced a remake of The Witcher 1, though we didn't know that at the time since it was all just project codenames at that point. This is in addition to the Cyberpunk expansion, the new Witcher trilogy, and other smaller projects in the works. And with Henry Cavill at the helm of the Witcher TV show, it really feels like... Wait, what? They got rid of Cavill? Who's replacing him? Who? Oh well, at least he's back as Superman now. That seems like a fair trade-up, and I'm sure he won't come to regret that decision. One of the more dominant and disorienting stories of 2022 was that of Bayonetta voice actress Helena Taylor. She took to Twitter in a series of videos, leveling the explosive allegation that she was offered a piddly $4,000 to reprise her iconic role, with many people springing to her defense because low pay in the voice acting business is very common and they didn't have any reason to doubt her story. Problem was, Helena wasn't giving us the full picture. She had earlier been offered some $15,000 for the job but turned it down because she was seeking significantly more, potentially even points on the package. When all this came out, her supporters felt rather had, and the well of sympathy for her ran immediately dry. She then doubled down, going so far as to criticize journalists reporting on the matter, calling them cogs in some bought and paid for machine or some nonsense. It was a sad end to the saga, but great to see replacement Jennifer Hale really nailing the role, and Kamiya has already confirmed that we can expect Bayonetta 4 sometime in the future. Video game wise, yeah, it was Broketober, so of course we had some video games. Overwatch 1.5 dropped. Man, that was a total whiff. Not bad per se, but absolutely not a sequel at all. Just another embarrassing notch in the saga of Blizzard's slide into malaise and or ignominy. Scorn divided people, but not me. I'm still in one piece. A Plague Tale Requiem took the series from AA to AAA and it was fantastic. Marvel Snap showed it was possible to put out a game on mobile without gouging your customers or tanking your reputation. And Gotham Knights, it existed. That's really all I have to say about that one.
So, that was a thing.
It's November. Liz Truss is out, but let us remain. We all tried to keep it together during Wakanda Forever, but be honest, you welled up at least a little bit in that intro splash when the whole cinema fell silent seeing Chadwick Boseman for the first time. Rest in peace, King, you are missed. Speaking of Marvel, EA announced that it had signed a 3-game deal with the house that Mickey built. The deal would see EA develop and publish 3 Marvel games, the first to be a recently announced Iron Man game coming out of EA Motive, the second is rumored to be a Black Panther game, and the third is a mystery. I think it must be said that EA has made up a lot of ground in these past 3 years when it comes to their single-player portfolio. Jedi Fallen Order, It Takes Two, Star Wars Squadrons, and the resurgence of Need for Speed. Plus, they're bringing back Skate and Dead Space Remake. Yeah, their sports business is still straight gambling, and Battlefield 2042 was a catastrophe, but you do have to give them credit for putting out a number of high-quality single-player titles free of microtransactions. Big move for a company who just a few years earlier had declared the single-player game effectively dead and buried. Notable news this month included the return of Mick Gordon, ripping and tearing his way through that Reddit post that Marty Stratton of id posted 2 years back. Mick had been trying to set the record straight since, alleging that it was actually him that was mistreated, lied to, and thrown under the bus. Mick brought a buttload of receipts to the table to prove his version of events, and they all seemed the more plausible given that Bethesda has to this point only responded with a bullshit JPEG that seemed to scold Mick for the very shit that Marty did with that Reddit post back in the day. Bethesda were very clearly daring Mick to sue, and given that they are a giant corporation now owned by Microsoft, and given that Mick is a dude with a synthesizer, it seems unlikely that Mick will get to have his day in court. While Mick Gordon hopes to one day find justice, Yuji Naka is desperately hoping that justice never finds him. In November, it revealed that the co-creator of Sonic had been arrested for insider trading after he and some buddies purchased some shares in a developer who was working on mobile titles for Square Enix, but none of those projects were yet public. He purchased some $40,000 US worth of stock, more than enough to get him in serious trouble given that insider trading is very serious business in most jurisdictions. It caps off a disastrous 2 years for the man, having last year released Balan Wonderworld, a game that topped many worst games of 2021 lists, and would later result in him suing Square Enix, saying they weren't letting him do his job. It's funny that all this went down in November, because that was the month that Sonic Frontiers dropped. Sonic Frontiers made a mixed reception from critics, but the fans loved it, owing to the fact that it was a perfectly playable Sonic game that you could play from start to finish, and that's a huge achievement for the Sonic franchise. The game nearly clinched the People's Choice Award at the Game Awards, but Jeff Keighley said that after the bots were removed, Genshin Impact won the day. Very cheeky, Jeff. Absolutely huge month of releases to round out the year. God of War Ragnarok, more on that in my Game of the Year video. Pentiment, Pokemon Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, 40k Darktide, also busted and broken. Callisto also busted. Man, I'm sensing a pattern here. Oh wait, it's just AAA games. I think we know the drill at this point.
I like the axe.
I too like the axe.
December is always a slowish month in the world of video games, publishers having blown their load in October and November and settling into some big marketing pump in the final rush towards Christmas. That doesn't mean it was totally devoid of news though. I mean, Xbox announced they were making the jump to the $70 AAA new release. It follows moves by Sony and many third-party publishers to do the same, and I'd have no problem paying that if I could be guaranteed that new release titles weren't stuffed with microtransactions and they actually worked on day one. Two things we all know that most AAA games cannot guarantee at this point. One of the most interesting stories to break in this period was a look behind the curtain at Poison Swamp HQ, FromSoft. A developer that is arguably the best studio working right now. It's always been a bit of a mystery just how much crunch goes into producing masterpiece after masterpiece. The answer, certainly at least some. The report from GamesIndustry.biz did detail a culture that demanded long hours and that paid exceptionally poorly. As I commented just recently, it's disappointing to hear that people this talented are being forced to work these hours while being paid so little. I hope that reporting like this prompts upper management to improve conditions. That story didn't dampen enthusiasm for FromSoft's opus as we approach the Game Awards, with Elden Ring being the frontrunner for the coveted Game of the Year nod, God of War Ragnarok nipping closely at its heels. I was in the audience that night. I saw Christopher Judge get up to receive his award, went out to go to the bathroom, got a drink, played a few rounds of Marvel Snap, and when I went back to my seat, he was still speaking. God of War would go on to win 6 awards that night, but Elden Ring did take home the 2 big dogs, Best Direction and Game of the Year. A big moment for Miyazaki and whoever the fuck this guy was.
I think I want to nominate this award to my Reformed Orthodox Rabbi, Bill Clinton. Thank you, everybody.
What a strange end to the show and to the year, really, since the timing of the Game Awards really does make it feel like the curtain falling on our industry so that everyone can take a break for the holidays, ready to come back recharged and ready to do it all again in 2023. For me, that show and this one really are a time to be a little pensive, to reflect back on the major takeaways and themes that the year will be remembered for. How then might we summarize 2022? And would I recommend it? I would, to be honest. The prior 2 years really fucking sucked. with the pandemic not only shutting the world down, but shutting us in our very homes. 2022 felt like the year where we could get back outside, or at least have the option to, since I'm a gamer, and Sunlight and we don't get along so well. Still, the return of industry events like Summer Games Fest, PAX, Gamescom, and the Game Awards were a reminder that this is a business about people, and the promise of even more events and more opportunities to connect with others in the future is nice to look forward to. I take tremendous pleasure in the utter destruction of the NFT scene this year, and I think we all owe ourselves a big pat on the back for beating that back with a stick. Huge W, and reason enough alone to consider 2022 a sterling success. Yeah, it wasn't a great year for big AAA releases, with Xbox in particular having a rough one, but look how much the indie scene once again stepped up. Nobody Saves the World, Ollie Ollie World, Sifu, Tunic, Stray, Neon White, Citizen Sleeper, Immortality, Vampire Survivors, so many others, the list goes on. I saw a tweet recently where a bunch of big streamers were complaining that there were no fun games to play this year, and it's like, dude, play some fucking indies, Jesus! There is so much there, and we are so lucky that the indie scene is as vibrant and as thriving as it is. There's always stuff to complain about in this business, but as I always say, if you find yourself wallowing in that stuff, you're just playing too many AAA games from AAA publishers. The industry is full of great people, great developers, great stories, and I try and find the balance between the good and the bad when I do this show. Some weeks, that's harder than others. Some years, that's harder than others. But not so in 2022. Overall, I think 2022 was alright, and so long as you were looking in the right places and playing the right stuff, you probably had yourself a good time. I know I did, but more on that in my Game of the Year video next week. For now though, thanks for tuning in, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Stay out of trouble, and I'll see you soon. You ever lose your wallet with all your credit cards in it, and then you have to cancel all those cards because who knows who'll find that wallet and what they'll do with it, right? Well, guess what? Your cards are probably all over the internet right now. Not the physical cards, mind you, just the numbers. But that's all hackers need to be able to start skimming money from you in ways you might not even notice for months. In 2022, we can't just trust every website we're shopping on to keep our data safe. We need to take our own steps to protect our own data, otherwise these sorts of hacks and scams are basically inevitable. Surfshark VPN is the best means of protecting your online data. Your passwords, your IP address, your personal information. Surfshark VPN encrypts your online data, protecting you from identity thefts and hacks, and their clean web feature automatically blocks over 1 million known malicious websites, phishing methods, and other threats. You know those chains you can get that stop pickpockets from stealing your wallet? Surfshark is like that, but for your internet wallet. Surfshark means you can browse and shop online with confidence. You can use Surfshark on multiple devices at once, which is something that almost no other VPN allows. It's available on pretty much every platform you can think of. It has 24/7 customer support, and it has a full 30-day money-back guarantee. Best of all, they're offering a special discount to viewers of this channel, giving you a massive 83% discount and 3 months free when you use offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Click the link in the description below or visit surfshark.deals/skillup. Thanks Surfshark for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.